We're going to talk a little bit in this session about forming disciples, exploring music's role in spiritual formation. I think it's ironic sometimes that we don't think of ourselves as music ministers, worship leaders, and we don't think of ourselves in the role of forming disciples. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, I don't know, but I think a lot of times it's an underrepresented role. I'll tell you a little story that kind of got me thinking about it. I have always perceived that the importance of music and the importance of music in forming people's lives and shaping them as Christ followers, primarily because that's my experience. If I were to take music and the music I've sung and learned through the years, if I were to take that role out, I'm not sure what kind of Christian I would be and what kind of Christ follower I would be. So personally, it's been hugely formative for me. But several years ago now, in an evaluation, I don't know how many of you in your churches have yearly evaluations where the congregation, some members of the congregation, personnel team, and different people evaluate you. And those are, my role is, my belief is that there are no, that all evaluations are painful because we never get the top in everything. And as musicians, we want to be at the top always. And so anything less than you're absolutely amazing is always disappointing. For most of us, because we have been trained to be like that. So anyway, the point was, one of the things that I was marked like satisfactory on was impacting the congregation as spiritual beings or something like that, or impacting them in terms of their daily lives and that kind of thing. So I thought, wow, I thought that's what I was doing every week. I thought that's what worship was doing, was changing lives and making people, allowing people to be formed into the image of Christ. And here, somehow, I am perceived as not doing that. So that got me really thinking about, how am I doing that, or how am I not being perceived as doing that, if that were true? Okay, so those are the kind of things you learn from the evaluations. Another thing that got me thinking in this realm was the new book that I have written. Somebody described it, a person whom I have a lot of confidence in, a colleague in another institution, said, I think the core of this book is about discipleship. He said, I really think that's what's really kind of woven through this whole book, is this whole idea of discipleship and how we're formed as Christ followers. So I got to thinking, well, that's not really what I had in mind when I was writing the book, but as an overarching theme, but maybe that's true, maybe not, I don't know. But it got me thinking about exploring this further and how does that process take place. So I don't have a whole lot of answers today, but I want us to talk about how does the process of being shaped into Christ followers, how does that take place, and how through worship does it matter and transpire, and how does it happen, particularly through music. So the session description is what we sing forms us as Christ followers, which I think is true. How does the combination of music and text shape us, inform us, and impact our daily lives? How can worship leaders be intentional in their role as disciples, which was part of, back to my evaluation, how can we be intentional about that? So spiritual formation, this is a definition that I just kind of put together. There's probably a lot of things that could make it better. But spiritual formation is anything that enhances our communion with God, shapes us into being more in Christ's image, involves us in the work of God in the world, forms our thoughts, practices, and actions Godward, and opens us up to the Spirit's promptings. So that was just what I thought was a fairly comprehensive definition of what spiritual formation actually is. So spiritual formation is broad. And I think as a starting place, we are formed in different ways, as differently as we are impacted by the world individually. So say that differently, not all of us will be formed in the same kinds of ways. So in music, different music would form us differently, and what might form you might not be formative for me at all, and what might speak to you might not to me, etc. And so we're all shaped according to who we are as individuals, which is the challenge then for all of us as leaders of a congregation of worshipers, all who are different. Okay. And what this actually means is that's one of the reasons that our responsibility, our job is so challenging. And the fact that everybody perceives music differently enhances that challenge. Words don't get as much critique as music by any stretch. I think that's going to be changing in our world, as we'll talk about in another session this week. But I think the reality is it doesn't. So, nothing is more primed to shape us spiritually than our regular and active participation in worship. I have begun to see that in people's lives, and I believe it to be true in my own. But why do we often, or do we often neglect worship's ability to form us? Do you believe that we do that? And if so, why have we not emphasized worship's ability, music, and particularly music in worship? Why have we not called it out if it does shape us? What are your ideas about that? Do you think we have?
We're not personally assuming a role. The music can say it until we become a conduit through leadership, through intentionality in relationships. That's a huge component of how that gets community. I think that too many of our times in the church expect you to be given to, they expect to be fed, they expect to be entertained, they expect to be critic. And we tend to hammer that some maybe at some level and provide them what they want, whether they want to challenge them, worship context, discipleship context.
Okay, so maybe the passive nature of worshipers is a part of that, and people not engaging and not trying to be intentional, maybe some of that. Others?
Maybe some people still see, the music portion of the service as the moment.
Okay, all right. Okay, so in evangelical circles, we call those preliminaries.
Yes. Yeah.
To something that was supposed to be needed. Not always, but it was.
And the whole concept of preparing people to hear the word of God means that there's something less.
But this is a warm-up act of some sort, or it's a preparation stage, and we put it into something as a preparation rather than a real deal. Yeah. I think that's shifting. I think that's certainly shifting among younger ministers and that sort of thing, but it's not, we're not there. Yeah.
I think we have a tendency to sing songs and not pay that close attention to the words. And I love this morning, or this afternoon, when they took the words from the hymn and put it into the prayer. I think we could do that more often, that draws you into it. It makes you more aware of the words, and I look back at it.
We would say, what did we sing? And you'd say, oh wow, I didn't know I just sang that, which sometimes it goes by fast. And I'm guilty too, of not engaging with what I'm really saying. Yeah. So my question was really then, so what if we've not emphasized worship as forming us into Christ followers, forming us into disciples, then what have we emphasized? Which is kind of what we're getting at. And that was the question that I kind of came to. So what have we been emphasizing? And I don't know, but I wonder if we've emphasized that music is always about feelings. That we either feel or we don't, and we don't engage with our minds. Feelings are not bad. The feelings are very, very important, but that's not the only word. It's not the only thing. What about attractiveness? We tend to describe sermons as things that impact us and help us or whatever, and music as something we either like or don't. So a lot of times we perceive ourselves to be in a performance mentality, which means an evaluative mentality, whether I like or I don't like, therefore it is important or not based on how I perceive it. I don't know, but that's a question I've been thinking. So if we're not being formed and we're not emphasizing that, then what are we emphasizing? Because we're always emphasizing something. See, there is an emphasis. It just is misguided, perhaps a misguided one. Now, since music often consumes 40 to 50% of our worship time, or more for some of us, music is primed to be the single most important shaper of our spiritual lives. Has that occurred to you? That it could be that music is the primary shaper of our lives, of our spiritual lives. And I believe that really is true. I really believe that's the case. Sometimes I think that everybody knows that, but nobody acknowledges it. And I think sometimes we need to be the person to acknowledge that, and we need to make sure that other people acknowledge that. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go along. A quote that I like from Eileen Gunter, who's an organist, wrote this quote a while back: "What people in our gatherings believe about God comes in large part from the songs they sing. This offers musicians and worship leaders a wondrous opportunity to guide the congregation's spiritual formation with music from as broad a perspective as we can. Music of lament as well as praise. Music that reflects the mission of our church. Music that delivers the message of the gospel. And music that leads to a concern for the world. Choosing music for worship, putting scripture and prayer on the lips of those in the worshiping congregation is indeed an awesome responsibility." I thought that was she covers a lot of areas in which we are able to impact the lives of people through the music that we sing. And she definitely shows the sacred responsibility of what we sing and why what we sing matters deeply and how we balance that and calls us toward that. Another quote from a very different perspective. When referring to his experiences as a teenager singing the Brahms Requiem, John S. McClure commented, "My knees buckled. I had to sit down for a moment. I had encountered the truth about myself and the reality of God, and that encounter was forming my spirit, molding it. In these and other circumstances, church choral music performs our spirits. It enacts a Christian spirituality." This is an article about the impact of choral music on spiritual formation specifically, but he cites that, and I thought again, I've been there. I've had those experiences through choral music and through congregational music, but that changed me. And I like the idea at the end that performs our spirits. It enacts Christian spirituality. And I think for me, the worship that we experienced today, it made my knees buckle. It changed me. It called me to a different place. It set a new bar for me. I used the word in my introduction that in worship we are recalibrated. I don't know what is the idea of recalibrating? What does that mean to you? What are some things that are recalibrated along the way? Yeah, this one needs tuning, we figured out, and we realized that through a strange series of events, we did not get the piano tuned. But we realized it this afternoon. So at 6 o'clock, there will be a person here from 6 to 7 to recalibrate, and he will come back tomorrow to recalibrate at a deeper level. During lunch. I said, just tune into itself today, and tomorrow we'll be working. All that. So exactly. But you don't know until you sit down there and you realize, something's wrong here. And I hadn't been over here and sat down at the piano, and he forgot, I forgot. There we go. Yeah, what else needs to be recalibrated? What are other things that have to be adjusted? Yeah. If you get the scale off a little bit, then you think you're either doing more poorly or doing better. So, yeah, what else? Timepieces of all sorts, Yeah, a couple of minutes off on a clock or a cell phone or something, makes a big difference. Yeah, that's right. It just doesn't work right. This doesn't work right. Yeah, I see worship as something that worship brings us back into our connection to God. It recalibrates us in terms of who God is. Because I believe that throughout the week, we are in a process for the most part of slowly believing that we are God. And that we are becoming more and more in control of our lives, kind of as our week goes along. And at least for a lot of us, Sunday morning is a place where we say, I am not God, God is God, and the community and the impact, it's different than just doing it individually, because I think being in a communal experience, for instance, our worship today, it's really hard to go against the whole sound of what we heard. You see, that in itself is a great witness to God's power. And that happens in corporate worship, where we are recalibrated. The idea of Joe's prelude of tune my heart to sing thy grace. My heart isn't necessarily tuned, as we're talking about the piano, to sing God's grace. But God can do that through worship. And then that's a part of the spiritual formation that happens.
Randall, you prompted this thought in my mind. We're not under the law anymore, but because of the pace and urgency of the church to grow, to be all things to all people, there's still a prescription for worship that I think is rhetoric for us. There's a posture for it. There's a confessed, there's a prescription of our posture before Him that I think we don't come from that. And I think He has to take His hands off, because even though we're not under the law, there's a prescribed posture that I think none of us even at our best are even tempting to discover.
Well, all the messages that we're hearing throughout our week are not telling us that God is in control. And they're not telling us that our role is to submit. We don't get that message. We're not being bombarded by that. We can't be by reading and being inspired in different ways. But for the most part, everybody's saying that's not the way the world works. And it's countercultural in all of this. And so it's really about. So I've really just begun to believe that Sunday worship is so much about retuning, recalibrating, readjusting.
Focus.
Yeah, all those re-somethings. Yeah, because it doesn't mean we haven't been there in some way, but we're redoing that. So that's really a lot of what spiritual formation is about. If spiritual formation is forming us into the image of Christ and into God's way, then that's what we're doing. So how has music and does music impact you? So I think always the starting point, before we think about how does something impact others, is how does it impact us? And so spending some energy thinking about what difference does it make for you, what difference does it make for me? Some believe that as much as 70% of our theology is formed through music. And nobody's done, that I know of, a quantitative study on that, but there's everything from 60, 70, 80% of all kinds of percentages people just throw out there. But 70% seems to be kind of the median way that people say that we're formed. So how does discipleship and worship fit together, and how does it happen? How do these two become in tandem with each other? I think worship is an ongoing process that consumes the meantime between here and our being with God. So worship is what we do. Worship is what connects us from this moment into the moment when we are ultimately with God. As we sang about this afternoon, lost in wonder, love, and praise. But what we do between here and there, it is that constant connection. It's the stream. It's the line that flows between those. So and worship happens in the meantime, in the already but not yet, in the transition moment here. We already talked about worship, recalibrating, resetting, etc., etc. Discipleship can take many forms, so we've already said that. So we can be in small groups, we can be in intentional Bible study, we can memorize scripture, we can intentional prayer, many things. But worship is one of the ways that discipleship takes place. But worship involves all of that, actually. And then you could go into worship as a way of life, and all of life is worship. But we're talking more specifically about corporate worship and corporate song. To be in God's image, we have to first be reminded that we are not God. So we've already talked about that. And worship is about transforming our brokenness. We are all broken people. We are all continually cracking and coming undone and having fissures established within ourselves in all these kinds of places. And worship is a way that we are put back together, and then our brokenness is covered in the blood of Christ, or smoothed over and is made okay. Every Sunday morning, a worship leader stands before people who have forgotten who God is and why He is so worthy of worship. That's one of the reasons we need to paint a clear, compelling, appealing, and accurate picture of God. And that's a quote I found from Bob Kaufman. I thought it was a very important quote. One of the reasons we need to paint a clear, compelling, appealing, and accurate. There are a lot of descriptions. And I would just say we won't always get all those right. We won't always get every one of them right. But we have to be working toward getting those right. I think those are very important. I just written in the margins above that. Worship must transform us. Any encounter with God should not leave us the same. But if we really believe that God is God and God has ability, God will change us, then an encounter with God shifts who we are and puts us in a new place, moves us into a different level. I don't think I always think of worship as having that ability, having that power. I think if I did, I do sometimes, but to be honest. So we think too little sometimes. Another idea that I would propose to you is working backward rather than forward. So asking the question of where are we headed? We talked about this being with God kind of moment. And how is it, where are we headed ultimately, the lost in wonder, love, and praise idea. So the idea from there to here, what we normally think of is not the same. We are going from here to there rather than from there to here. But what if we were to think of that differently? So the question would be, if we were to say the ultimate worship will be with God in heaven, and that will be the culmination of all of who we were created to be and what God has intended for us, then asking questions like, what is God like? What will heaven be like? What will worship look, sound, feel, smell, and taste like? Who will be included in this worship? Will it be multilingual, or will it be only our language? Will it be multi-musical? Will it be only our preferred styles? Will it only be about what we like? Shouldn't the meantime be in the direction of the destination musically and otherwise? And what are the implications of this? So that if you imagine what this ultimate worship experience, as much as we could think about who God is, which is pretty limited, but if you could imagine that, and then you could say, well, if this is what we're looking toward, now how do we bring that back? And then how would we get from here to there? What would we need to do now in order to be connected along that continuum? And that's been pretty big deal for me. Because I asked my students a while back in a class, I said, so if you have a God that only speaks one musical language, then how big is your God? And if your God only sounds like the music that you like, then how much could you trust that God? So if God, because that means God would be created in our image, right? Which would be certainly idolatry. Just to get started. So to think of God, who God might be, and then to go backwards in that would help us with this whole spiritual formation thing. Let's move on as we kind of unpack that idea a little bit. But the next level, music changes us. We cannot explain how, but we know it to be true from the testimony of others and from our own experience. So when you start to think of how music changes you, and we start to try to explain it to others, it's kind of one of those things, if you don't get it, you probably won't get it. But we know it to be true, and it's undeniable, but there's a mystery in there. It doesn't make any sense, does it? Have you ever stopped to think about the idea that how does sound, why would singing be such a big deal? It doesn't make any sense that it would be, to me. But I know it to be true. The testimony is that it does. Music broadens the focus of our prayers. It gives us words to speak when we can't think of them, and it gives us sonorities when feelings are too deep for words. So how many times have you prayed when you said, that's the prayer that I would pray if I could have thought of that? but thankfully someone else thought of it for me. Or that sound is the prayer I am feeling. And the sound was worship for you. The sound connected you in a way that you could never have done. And that's what choral music does for me. And I guess that's one of the reasons I'm so immensely partial to choral music, because I have had so many experiences through choral music that I could never, ever have had on my own. And they've been God experiences for me. So for me, it's about the choral music and the way I have explained it or justified or encouraged it with my students is not because it's preserving art and not because of any of those things, but because it utilizes a group of people to do something that none of us could do on our own. There's no way that I can make these sounds on my own. And that's huge. Music helps us feel God's love and feelings have the power to shape us for the long term. I think it's neglected a lot of times that our feelings really, really, really matter. And music does have the ability to help us feel things more deeply. And ultimately, feelings do have to do with thoughts and patterns. Feelings shape us. Again, feelings are not always the beginning point, but feelings can be the beginning point. They can shape us, and we must not neglect them. We must not simply, the feeling people in our congregation, the people for whom feeling is the first stage, we must not always diminish the importance of that. And for some of us, just because feelings are not our first stopping place on the journey, it doesn't mean it's not important. I have come to a stage where I wish I felt more. Sometimes I don't feel as much as I wish I did. I wish I would lose myself in worship and lift my hands and wouldn't care whether anybody saw me or not. And I wouldn't care at all. I wish I were that person. So I have learned not to be the judging person of that, but to say, I wish I could do that. Wish I could be that free. Wouldn't that be wonderful? You see? Instead of saying something to defend my own lack of. Hear the difference there? Yeah. What if I could? You say, wouldn't that be amazing? And I'm not saying I can't, and that I won't. I'm just trying to submit those things to God rather than defend them personally. See?
As an educator, you must experience students who learn in different kinds of, we all know that. And because we all learn different tangibles, very intangible, wouldn't it support the fact that in worship we'll all receive through very tangible kinds of ways, very intangible kinds of ways. So I think as worship leaders, if we're educators, we have to adapt ourselves to the different learning styles. That's right. So it's translating worship.
And that's why we need the community. And we need the whole community to be speaking so that what I might not experience, Todd might experience. And I can experience that through Todd. And I can experience this through Mark. And I can say, either Mark here, lined up, that I could say, that may not be my experience, but oh, if it could be. And I can vicariously live it through you, which is the whole lot of the communal aspect of worship. But that changes the way we view our worship and the way we view community, the way churches, we view people in our congregations, and it ultimately could change the way people in the congregations view each other if we were to empower that communal thought and find ways to share those communal stories. Music forms us into missional people who are transformed as we engage with God in the world. Music sends us out. It gives us a message and a vehicle. It gives us words to speak. One of the ways I think we'll say here later is that you know whether music and text have informed people is by listening to their conversations. How many times do song kinds of things show up in conversation? And you can tell a lot about how people think. You will see it even more blatantly in the way people pray. For those of us who are 50 and older, what are some ways that you have, in your lifetime, you have seen prayer language transition through song language? There's some phrases that became popular through the song language. Some of you others might have studied some of those things, but you wouldn't have necessarily lived through it. Well, we have a whole lot of Gaither language in prayers. The whole terms of let's and the use of just. We didn't talk about just this and just that until we had let's just praise the Lord and some other Gaither language. Sandy Patty language was huge in prayers in my generation. Oh God, we just praise you for who you are. That's Sandy Patty. That's Bible language, but it became popular through Sandy Patty. And we did, and then my question was, well, who is God? Let's go a little deeper, and describe. But all those kinds of things. We have a lot of prayer language that comes through our song language. You can hear that a lot through students. You can hear praise songs just interwoven all through the prayer language, song phrases. Some of us have intentionally not done that, so we're not good studies, you see. We're not a good group to study. Analyzing what a congregation sings gives people both a window into their heads and their hearts. When you analyze what a congregation sings, you pretty well know what they believe and who they are as Christ followers. Now that's saying that people have a chance to have some input on what they sing. But the truth is, if they don't have a chance to have some input on what they sing, they will change you. Or they will send you on your way, actually. So congregations are known by what they sing. And you will know what they believe by what they sing. It's a very interesting study if you watch it and listen to it, and you know a congregation well enough over a long enough period of time. Yeah. And if you could study what they do. It is often music that has a staying power to stick with the congregation all week long. And as John Whitfleet says, it is the music of worship that echoes in our minds during sleepless nights and that we whistle on the way to work. I don't know about you, but we get to this, I've gotten to this age where sleeping is not something I'm very skilled at anymore. And I wake up a lot at night, and often music and texts and things that I know are the things that I return to and the things that I use to comfort myself and to sustain me. People receive music in different ways, as Stephen was saying, intellectually, physically, emotionally, etc. And it's important that we hear them. All must be accommodated, and in some way we must set a place for these people. It can't be every week, and the table can't be set for every person every week, but in some ways we have to accommodate all of these possibilities. Our congregation is not a big hymn medley congregation. I don't know about yours, some of yours probably are, but we just don't do that a lot, and maybe they would like it a lot. I would have never asked them, I guess, true confessions. But a few weeks ago we did a medley, just unapologetic. We strung three things together, and they were, and it gave some people in our congregation, it connected to their story. It connected to maybe a bit of a dormant part of their story, and they came forth with great appreciation for that. We did, another series. This was not intentional again, but it fit a theme. We did a series of a couple of hymns. We sang "I Must Tell Jesus" and "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus," and I don't know what else, but I got a note from somebody who never ever sends me an email and said, "I really liked the hymns we sang on Sunday. Thank you so much." And I sent a gracious email back, but the implication was we don't do that very often, and you hit some important ones this week, and maybe that was a different thing. But I heard the story ringing, and I thought, if you knew this person, you would not think that those hymns would be this person's story. You wouldn't think that at all, but they are. But to know that matters. It matters. We are not separate from our music. Our music is intricately connected to all that we are. It's deeply rooted. Some cultural, sociologists say that we are our music, that we are so, younger people are so ingrained in music that music is inseparable from who they are as individuals. And to critique their music is to offer a direct critique of their personhood. I believe that's true. I believe that to be true. Because people are constantly plugged in music. If you were to see this campus this fall, you would see lots and lots and lots of musics going on, just going down the sidewalk that people can use. I suppose it's music, it could be any number of things. And we can be so immensely selective about our music these days, by things like Pandora and, listening to with our daughter recently, and I said, could we please just get off Disney for a moment? It's like we were working on a project in like 30 minutes, we were hearing Disney, and I said, let's just, she had show tunes or something like that, and I said, well, let's just modify that search ever so slightly, let's broaden the show tunes a bit, or something, because a little bit too much. But you can be so specific, and some of us could never imagine that. Music, like faith, functions most effectively in community. Our goal is to facilitate a healthy and vibrant community of song. And the book that I've recently written has a whole section on community and the way music connects us to community. But it functions most effectively in community. It is a communal event, and it is one of the last holdouts of true community. I'm not sure that all of our congregations sing very communally, but it is our goal, and it's a place that we need to be working for. Music forms us by repeating the whole drama of salvation over a lifetime. And over a lifetime, a year and a cycle. One time somebody critiqued me heavily for using a particular song in a worship event. It's not Alleluia, it was another big, huge national event that we had one time. And said, this song doesn't tell the complete story. It doesn't tell the complete God story. And why would you use this song? And my response was that I think it's probably too heavy a burden for any song to carry the complete gospel. And this person was a preacher, and I said, and I think probably it's too heavy a burden for any sermon to carry. But over a period of time, the story is complete. Oftentimes, songs that do tell everything are not as useful as the songs that cover one thing, because they're very hard to work into worship because you spill everything before you need to, So, or they don't touch on anything deeply enough that we get much of a development of anything. Just personal observations. Music conforms our faith to the broader faith, historic, global, and ecumenical. And it becomes not my faith, but it becomes our faith. And it conforms our faith to many, many broader things in a way that many of our lives and many of our experiences wouldn't be done otherwise. The music of the church contains all the central doctrine of the church. It's a complete story if you're conscientious about letting there be a complete story. And we can all get on a few pet subjects that we sing about all the time, and we don't have a complete story. But it is incumbent for us to make sure that there's a broad story that gets told through the music. The music of the church focuses on the complete drama of salvation, on God and what God did through Christ, and God's work is highlighted. And I just put it in the margins, yes, exclamation, but that's what we want it to do. Music grounds our faith and connects us to specific times and places. Our spiritual memory is shaped largely through the songs that we sing. Have you ever imagined sharing your story, your faith story, by songs? And what songs would you put to describe, to tell your faith story, to tell who you are as a Christ follower? How would you do that, and what songs would you put? It's an interesting little thought I've thought about a bit. And how has my faith journey been impacted by the songs that I've sung? Where am I now? Where have I been? Where might I be going? So it's an interesting story. But I think it's true that our faith is easily done that way. Singing a balance of the church's songs from different times in history allows us to experience a balanced faith that singing the songs of one historical period does not provide. And I would submit that every time in history is unbalanced. That there are no perfectly balanced times of history. And so when we sing songs about, historically, about pietism or about revivalism or about any number of historical ideas, we are able to show a more complete God story than if we only sang songs about today or songs from any other particular historical period. When we sing, we perform and embody our faith. By acting out our faith and putting it into our bodies, we are able to recall our faith in ways that move beyond cognition. So how is it that that happens? And we talked a little bit about senses and all of that kind of thing. There was an article that circulated a lot last week about that heart rates synchronize among choral singers. Okay. I started working on a choral journal article that was supposed to have been out a while back, and it didn't get finished. But one of the things that I was looking for, I had written that our heart rates synchronize when we sing. I found a good study that obviously our breathing is synchronized, and then there's probably no other place where 300, 1,000 people might actually all take a breath at the same time, as in congregational singing. There's just nowhere else would we do that. So that's true. But I couldn't find any evidence to support the heart rate thing. But now I have a study to show that yes, we do. Our heart rates do come kind of in synchronization, do start to synchronize when we sing together. So that in itself is an embodiment, and it's a pretty sophisticated thing. It's pretty amazing. Through singing, we live into deeper and more complex expressions than with words alone. It affects our senses and our souls, and it's far deeper than just words. Through singing, we establish a direct connection to a lifetime of faith encounters. As leaders, our goal is to offer balanced faith formation experience over a series of weeks, months, and years. No single service can hold all the wonders of God. So over a period of time, we need to look at that. Leaders must expect spiritual formation to occur through music. We must talk about spiritual formation, and we create an environment where it is anticipated. Now, that's one of the most important things that I want to mention today, is that I think where we have not been truthful enough is we have not said what music does. And our role has been, well, why should we have to say it? We all know it's true. We feel it, we experience it. Sometimes you have to say it. Okay. So back to my evaluation of mine not affecting the spiritual formation of the congregation and being perceived as not playing an active role. I don't think I wrote enough about that and I said enough about it. Not meaning that I needed to say it in worship, but somehow I need to be sure that people know that their lives are being transformed through this so that it doesn't just happen and they have no concept of it. Not just so my evaluation is better, but sometimes people don't know it happened until you call it out of them. If you ever had an experience before where you had the ability to do something and you were actually doing it, but you didn't know you were doing it until somebody said, you're very good at something, and then you said, well, gosh, I guess I am. I guess I do that all the time. But I never thought of it. Sometimes we have to name it. And that would be one primary point I would make today. Spiritual formation through music offers a fuller gospel message. And you might ask the question, so where are the weaknesses? What part of the gospel are we not focusing on? What parts are we neglecting? Do preachers neglect certain aspects of the gospel on a regular basis? Have you ever had that experience? You worked with preachers who, this is kind of the themes they always preach on. And we don't get into other things. Well, it's our role to offer the balance sometimes. It's our role to say, oh yeah, there's a whole trinity here, or whatever. And offer that other side. The songs of God, a spiritual formation through music, songs of all God's people. Who in God's family is omitted in those songs that we sing? The question would be, who do we not sing about? And when we sing global songs, when we sing songs of other cultures and other times and other places, we are saying, our God, the God that we serve, is bigger than this place and this locale and what is happening at fill-in-the-blank place. We're saying that, and we must say that, and we must make sure that people understand that. Cyclical and sequential songs. Cyclical and sequential songs. That's help me a second. is Michael Hahn. Michael Hahn, you kind of coined that term, but cyclical songs are songs that you sing a number of times. So you keep singing the same song. Today we sang, "Oh, great God, give us rest." We sang that a bunch of times while it kind of sank in. That had a lot of text, so it wasn't just one thing over and over. But that can be considered a bit like a cyclical song. A sequential song is one that, more like a hymn, where it has a lot of text that lines up, and you keep singing, you sing a different text with the same melody. So we need all of those kinds of things. How could cyclical songs that we sing a lot of times, why are those important for spiritual formation?
Wouldn't you say choruses, all that kind of...
Exactly. Yeah. And much of praise and worship music, and not necessarily all by any means, but some parts of it. Why is that important? Sinks in. Gives us time to let something kind of sink in deeply and to kind of let it find a spot and soothe and all of that. So it's not just about singing heavy content and just, pounding and striking. Because, the truth is there's some really important hymns, and I've sung a lot of times that I can't quote any part of it. And 2 weeks ago in church, I got mixed up on something and couldn't sing the words to something I've sung all my life. That was, I don't know why not, but it just escaped me in the moment, and it's a bit embarrassing. But things sink in different ways with different people, and we need all of that.
Would you say cyclical? The cyclical would be motion, and sequential, or...
Oftentimes it will affect our feelings and and it gives us space to sort of fill in the gaps, maybe. It gives us room to sort of put our own words in between things. And maybe our own prayers, and without having to be quite as concerned about other rhyme and text and vocabulary and what was that, did I catch that, all that kind of stuff. Excuse me. Also, an intergenerational faith. It's important that we sing the songs of different generations so that our faith becomes not just about the faith of our generation, but we have the faith of another generation. Spiritual formation through music should have a broad vocabulary, a broad musical vocabulary and verbal vocabulary. The sound of formation. What is the sound of formation like? And how should sounds form us? And how do sounds matter to us? And how do sounds shape us spiritually? That's a whole other study, but something I think that's worth a lot of consideration. Approaching the intangible. What things are too deep for words, and what things just can't be named. And again, back to the worship experience today, I think there were some moments in there where, you could say lost in wonder, love, and praise all you want to, but unless you've sung that, and maybe heard it, and felt it, then you think about it in a different way. At least I did. Okay, moving ahead, rethinking our approach. Some ways that we might become, especially more multi-musical. One would be trusting the community, believing and letting the community speak. Empowering others. We talked about that quite a bit in the last session. Allowing others to speak forward and their voices to be heard, which offers a contrast to our voice. Relying on experts, and maybe not even experts or just others, but relying on people. We may not consider experts, but people we need to hear. Allowing others to help listen. One of the things that I've depended on other people to do is to say, here's a song that we might want to sing. What about this song? Have you heard this song? And trying to rely on others, because there are some places in music I just don't listen to naturally. And I just don't go there, but I might find some gem there. Somebody else might know something. We can never or should be the full embodiment of Christ, musically or otherwise. All are needed and should be included. The communal process of discipleship. Our not speaking a musical language, this is from the book, is no excuse for leaving our congregation homebound and unable to travel. So just because we are not adept in the musical language doesn't mean that somebody else in our congregation might not be. And through another musical language, somebody's life might be transformed and touched. So who can provide what we can't provide, and who could be the interpreter on this journey that we are on? Who could interpret this for us as we go down this uncharted territory. Digging deeper, we are a diverse body of Christ. Music represents who we are. We said that. Diverse locally and globally. So sometimes we're not even diverse locally, much less globally. Embracing and showing value for all God's people ultimately opens us up to the expansion of God and the vastness of God's creation. So I ask the question on the margin here, what if your God looked like your music? How would you paint the God that you believe that is the God you serve? How would you describe this God through sound? What would this God look like? And if that's all true, then what's the sound like, and how limited is this God that you serve? Consider approaching the music of the church as freeing, not entangling. I think that has all kinds of possibilities for helping us by, instead of so much music and so many options are negative, but if that becomes a freeing aspect. Abundance versus scarcity. There's so much music, and as a student of mine says all the time, so good, so good, so good. There's a lot of so good stuff out there in lots of places. Asking the question, how much can I experience, rather than how much can I avoid? It's really changed me a lot of times to say, how much of life can I experience, and how much could I actually get, rather than how much could I not have to get? And how would that shift who I am? Our worship reflects a God who values and accepts all people in their worship gifts. We seek to model the final gathering of all God's people. We talked about that. We want to value all that God values. Now, some take it home with you things, and then we'll have just a moment for questions, I hope. Introduce new songs that you might not normally be attracted to. When's the last time you introduced a song to the congregation that when you introduced it, you really didn't like it? Yeah. I think it's kind of important that you learn to like it before you stand up, or you learn to at least believe it's important and why it's important. But I will tell you, I've introduced some songs that I thought were good for us and myself, that I wanted to like because I believed it would be right if I liked it, but I didn't actually like it at first, especially. And maybe still don't. But who called me to leave what I liked? How limiting would that be? Be conscious of different styles, tempos, volumes, and other aspects of music that might allow it to engage more deeply. Just because I might be put out by really loud sounds and might think, I can't even hear myself think, somebody else may really be engaged by something that's quite different. Those are hard words for me to speak, but I spoke them. Balanced types of text, praise, lament, question, and instruction. So balancing all of this helps people to have a more broadly formed faith. Review worship at mid-year to see if your congregation has sung a complete gospel. If not, then why not? What is missing? What have you not emphasized much? What what theological perspectives have not been touched on? Why not? And let's catch them up. Maybe the summer is a good time to catch those up. Realize that you can't be responsible for the people that always show up to worship every once in a while. Okay? That you can be true to the ones that show up regularly. Okay? To the 75%ers. Incorporate the Christian year into your church's worship. And I think that the Christian year, whether it's obvious or not, or whether you ever speak Christian year language, if it is a subplot to what you're doing, it helps keep you balanced, and it helps you not to ignore the major tenets of our faith. And that's really, really helpful for me. Involve others in worship planning. It helps us not have blind spots. When other people who see things very differently offer their input into worship planning, it just keeps you from having the blind spots. And my goodness, we all have so many blind spots. But it helps us. Carefully observe how others talk about their faith and notice when songs come into their conversation. I've kind of played that little game to talk to people and see when they talk about the music that they listen to. Or how often do they bring up something from worship? Or how often do they incorporate some aspect of something into their faith, into their God talk, in a sense. If any of you are a part of a small group, that's especially a good place to do that. And a cell group kind of place where people share their stories a lot. It's very, very interesting to see how that works. Balancing cyclical and sequential songs and be intentional about that. And you'll have the people that'll say, I really just don't like when we sing the same old text over and over and over and over. It's just boring, whatever. And you can say, well, why don't you pray during those boring moments? Why don't you pray between? You don't say it that way. I would say, I understand, but I've found that sometimes it gives me some space to fill in some of those blanks and to think, what is God saying to me here? You just share your story. Just share your own experience. Don't say, why don't you? That wouldn't be helpful at all. But it's all about how you say it. There's hardly anything that can't be said with enough pastoral foresight. Intentionally incorporate songs from other countries, other historical periods, other faith perspectives, and more. And but be intentional about that. Otherwise, that might not be on the radar. Ask yourself these questions. If we are what we sing, who are we? What do we believe? What do we value? Who do we trust? How much do we care? By analyzing the songs we sing, what would an outsider say about us? If somebody totally from the outside came and only heard what you sing in worship every Sunday, how would this person analyze your theological self, and how would they imagine the formation, the look-like godness of your congregation? Questions and observations that you might have. Yes.
You talked earlier in the session before this one about having a celebration of the culture, a story, and each service. I'm really lucky to work with two pastors and creative planning team, and we get together and we discuss what services we're going to do 6 weeks ahead usually. So I go off after all of these people got together and try to the musical picture that accompanies the message. We find myself having worship sessions at my desk with my hymnal as I read the verses and verses, looking for verses that apply. I just have my own worship sessions reading. The poetry is incredible. And some of the old hymns and the language is these and thous. If there was just some way, I guess, how do I say in the congregation, it has to be about, here's the message. And sometimes I'll say, today's music connects the pastor saying, look for this.
We have to constantly be looking at what connects, and that's where the listening really matters. Because sometimes maybe the and now won't connect with some people and won't have the potential to connect in some places, at least without providing a much broader context that we talked about a little bit ago, or outlining that a bit more. It might not connect, and we might really have to rethink that, and we might have to update some of those things. But listening is huge there.
I don't think we never forget that young people can truly connect and it's really strong to my own personal experience. And my daughter was graduated from college, serious surgery, so she was about 22, and she was in the recovery room, and she said, "Mother, would you sing Be Strong in the Lord?" And I went, "Oh, I remember all of those words." And that was the most unlikely song a person had said, "Mother, would you sing this to me?" But it was deep into her soul. I mean, she was, coming out of anesthesia, and she wanted to hear, "Be strong in the Lord."
Sometimes to ask yourself, or to observe, what do you sing in your greatest crisis? surprise yourself. And to watch people around you, watch your family members, what do they sing, what do they know. But we sing what we know, so the more we know, the more options we have, right?
Most people don't have what I would call heart music in the same sense that Bible translators talk about heart language and they want to translate scripture to people will get the emotional impact of scripture in the same area.
Right.
I sort of wonder if that is the music of youth, the music to which we put unknown God. But I think that maybe for a lot of people that is the music that speaks to them. And weakness like the person of love, those things that you mentioned. And I think that where we miss a lot of traditional services, Presbyterian program in particular, is that, that I think that to the extent that we get taught in our colleges and churches a certain amount of music is proper, I think we really miss the opportunity to minister through those proper music.
I agree. And I think that the snobbery that we are all, that is passed down to us is somehow supposed to be a gift. I don't think it is. I think it's pretty much a curse, and it's something that we need to submit to God to heal us from. And then we don't need to be apologetic when we're around our friends who would expect that snobbery to be minimal. And I think sometimes just like you can shut down gossip by saying, well, I've never thought of her like that. That's not been my experience with her. I think you can do the same thing with music and say, it's not been my experience. I'm really not there. Because I don't think there is a place in the church for musical snobbery. And I think that's one of the main things that we need to repent from. And we certainly don't need to teach it to our young people. Because why should we curse them with something that we've had to work through ourselves? It's not helpful. I don't think Jesus would do that. Jesus would be a part of that at all. There seems to be no evidence that Jesus would have done that. So, those are hard things. And they're hard when you work in a place that is, places that are often filled with snobbery. And you are trying to not do those things. But when we're trained in those ways, a lot of us. I think it's important to pick one aspect of what Rick said. We'll go on this one. But I think that it's important that we realize that we are shaped in significant and deep ways by certain experiences at certain times in our life. And some believe that in our 20s we are shaped tremendously by the music of our young adulthood, maybe not so much by our youth, but by a formative coming of age kind of time. And many people get kind of stuck in that category. I think it's important that we, as leaders of music, we determine not to be stuck in memory. Because we can be stuck in memory at any age. College students are often stuck in the memory of youth experiences and youth camp and whatever, because that's all they know. Doesn't mean they wouldn't move on if we helped them to, but we must help them. But they must also help us, so that we're all being a part of a deeper memory, a deeper foundation that then can launch us to more imaginative places, and ultimately help us to view God more broadly. Yes. And it won't always be that people will appreciate all of what we do, and we have to do that for the sake of the ministry that we're called to do. Yeah, it won't really kill us. It'll just be thankful at times. Yeah, we'll be fine.